You are now listening to the I Think I Love My Wife podcast. And this is your best friend's best friend, Chidozie Okafor, ready to take you on another journey. Are you with me? Because I'm ready. Let's get it. This episode is sponsored by Nello Effect, a coaching and consulting service that helps people turn mindfulness into action as they navigate the dating world as well as their relationships. Follow on Instagram at nello.effect and find more information in the episode description. Today, we dive into the importance of creating boundaries and relationship norms while dating someone with a child. We discuss the journey of becoming a stepfather, and we explain why you should break through taboo norms and not wait too long to have meaningful conversations on important topics, whether it be life goals, salary, income, whatever's important to you. Last time we were chatting, we were talking about, the advice I gave you, perspective I gave you to help provide some clarity on whether to move forward, how to, get past some like the hesitancy you had in terms of, a relationship with the person that had a child. And so, fast forward 2+ years later, how has stepfatherhood been? I think you might be the first stepfather I've had on the podcast. And so how has that experience been? It's like an accelerated, life lesson.
That's an understatement right there, man. But I think it's been great. All right, it's nothing prepares you for it, right? I think I can't specifically relate to like new parents when they have a baby, but like the theme I always start to hear from them or from like folks that got 2-3 kids that's in their teens, it's like nothing you do will like fully prepare you. You just got experience of stuff. And so for me, I think it effectively just put adulting on 1,000. Mm-hmm. But the ability to, influence and shape, someone's life, try to be their support system, like see their growth, progressions, across the board. And, also deal with the tensions and potential behaviors and struggles in the same vein. It's a beautiful experience. I think when I look back at it now over these last few years, it is so funny how I am like a spitting image of like my parents to a certain extent. It's like I went from, being out and about at the bar to like yelling like, hey, don't you be running up and down around these stairs in this house. Right? Like it's just like out of nowhere. And it just makes you appreciate like, oh, like I had a really good upbringing. I had, solid individuals around me, and that has, whether I realize it or not, impacted my views and how I try to approach, this thing called parenting.
Yeah. Do you and the child, do you and
the child.
Your daughter, I would say she's your daughter now, right? Do you and your daughter beef?
Not really.
She's not that age yet. She got a couple more years.
She's at that age. She's at that age. Like I got a high schooler starting in a couple of months. So
oh man,
at that age.
Boys and sheesh.
Yeah. But we've never like actually like bumped heads.
Oh, not like let me take it back. Not like beef like adults beef, but like she's clearly mad at you and you're clearly frustrated with her.
Yeah, we've definitely had those, right? I think that's 80 variant, but like
how do you navigate it differently as a stepfather, or is it just the same?
I think so. For me, it evolved over time.
Yeah.
So the first, and this is like before me and my wife got married, we were living together. So it's all of us, and that first year it was hard for me to try to figure out, okay, am I like an equal, effectively authoritarian voice or only when she's not around? Mm-hmm. So I would tend to defer to different things. But then my wife was like, no, like you are here, you're an adult, like she needs to, respect you as much as she respects me. And that was never an issue because she had already instilled that in her daughter. But I think that first year was like a couple of times where just like 9, 10-year-old habits, like, hey, pick that up off the ground, like close that. And it's like, no, you need to do this. And she would always do it. But pout a little bit. And then just after that first year, so I got more comfortable, I think, in my skin. And we had, at that point in time, you're around somebody, so you pick up on everything.
Yeah.
And so it became a lot easier to then know when I needed to be more, more the dad figure versus the Courtney figure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess how much did her making comments like that help you, like, empower you, give you permission to, move forward? Because, I don't think that everybody has like a clear conversation. And so how important was that for you to be able to green light,
I think it was immensely important because like a couple of instances, and this I'm saying fortunately because I can only think of a couple that were like really, really minor, of like, my wife having to basically discipline her daughter verbally. Got to put that out there.
Listen, I believe in spanking kids, but I don't have none.
Yeah, but it was more of a, hey, like, you know how you're supposed to act. You're supposed to do something XYZ way. Like, he is an adult. You're supposed to listen to the blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And so I think that was empowering for me. And I'm pretty sure around that time, especially over those first couple of years, we were, like, this was a topic of conversation. Like, hey, how do I, like, when do you want me to kind of step in and do something? Or like, how do I not be like the third party figure and
the part of the unit?
Equal? Yeah. And I think she was, she was great at that. Meaning my wife was great at that, of just, I know, like, you're effectively, even though we weren't married at the time, stepdad. And we put that into practice with everything, going to the grocery store, going to and from practices, me checking a lot of homework. And actually, she put a lot of that on me at the time. She was like, okay, you go check the homework. You go figure out, 4th, 5th grade math. And that also caused a little bit of strife because I had to learn how to best as possible communicate with a kid for, school stuff.
Yeah.
And you just realize, like, I don't know how they teaching these kids some of this stuff today anyway. Right. So it's like, okay, you just learn it by doing it, right? It's okay, I get out work and then I come home and checking multiplication tables.
Yeah. It
was not the plan.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great that she, I like to say, created that space for you and empowered you so that you felt more comfortable doing it. Outside of, like, I think disciplinary kind of events is like always top of mind. But as you guys started to think about the future, right? Future planning and things like that with her, with your daughter, how much of that was like a unit type decision? Like, you might decide on like a house you guys were going to buy versus her decision, but like, I want to know what your thoughts are type of thing. And things that come to mind, like, I don't know if you dealt with this, but things that come to mind is like the type of school that person is going to go to, things like that, where you're thinking about, hey, if this was your child, your biological child, you obviously would be a co-contributor to it. In this case, I could see different people taking different routes, in terms of how they want to handle it. So how does she handle things like that? It might not be limited to like school. It's just like in general.
No, I think that's a good example though, because like we've literally had to live through that a couple of times now. And so my wife her and I would talk, and we would have our opinion on things, but like we would always ask, my stepdaughter, like, what do you think? And we try to explain things to her while we're considering different choices. One, just because we think it's good for her well-being to understand, like, these are the types of things you're going to have to do when you get older. But to also take, her experiences and emotions into account. And so, like, right now, we're in the process of building a house. Fingers crossed that gets done.
Bruh, but I don't even want to start on that. But
that's a whole different, right? But like, we've had to this is our second place where we've lived and we're renting, and it was driven by school choice decisions. So I had to learn about that, and we were very diligent about like, okay, what are the options that we have available, and what do you think? And luckily, there was not we're all on the same page. But if, me and my wife were like, hey, this is what we are going to decide, and it's X, and it may be different from what you think is Y, we were, as a unit, okay to do that because we're thinking holistically about the long term. We've always approached everything that way. Like, we were considering a last minute vacation, for this coming weekend, and we had a couple locations in mind. It's like, hey, what do you think about this one? Like, to have her feel valued versus, they just gonna tell me what to do.
Yeah, that's household I grew up in. Just show up. No, I mean, for obvious reasons, right? Like, I think her perspective and her approach is a great one, and probably why y'all are married and together. But if you take your wife out of it and think about, what if you were in this situation? I try to bring in, perspective of listeners, right, that may not have it as set up as you were, right? If you were in a situation where your partner wasn't as enabling in terms of encouraging you to go, be that authoritative figure and take full ownership, similar to how she is, or hey, when it comes to this and this is my child, how would that have impacted your relationship?
That's a great question, man. Honestly, I don't know if I'd be having this conversation with you if that was her perspective on lots of things, because I, as someone coming in, am not someone who is saying, well, because I think X, we should always go do it. But I at least expect my partner to be able to, have a conversation with me and like talk things through, versus like, well, okay, if we were already like living together and just magically it becomes something comes up and it's like, well, we have always done it this way, even though I'm asking you about something a different way. Like, to me, that's just not going. It just doesn't vibe for me. I think other people might be okay with it, but like the way I took the approach of sensing how likely that would be early on is just trying to observe how her and my stepdaughter interacted together, and also see, before we were even engaged, and this is going back to the conversation around like, okay, I can marry you, but do I want to?
Yeah.
It's like, how are those instances, playing out when we may have disagreements on something?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think for me, it was like, okay, well, let me see how, when those experiences and those instances come up where you might think one thing, I think another, and it's okay if we're not always on the same page, but if you end up on well, this is me and mine and ain't no conversation, you know what? Great. I'm glad I saw that. That's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And so I think luckily I was able to see and experience some of those things to see how we would operate as a unit, which allowed me to be more bought in to the future of being married.
Gotcha. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is you saw some of those traits in terms of how she would handle those situations well before you like even proposed. Absolutely.
Right. It's like, I think about how anybody that's, you have dated or I've dated, like there are always signs to different things, right?
You got to trust your gut, man. Trust your intuition. Right. If you got good intuition.
Same exact thing, though, as it relates to seeing how someone else is dealing, with their kids if they're involved, right? Like, you see how it is, and you got to make a judgment call on, like, if that is something that works for you.
Yep.
Because there's that balance of, okay, on one hand, do you expect them to always put their kid first? Versus, okay, like, if we are married, like, am I going to be first or am I going to be second? And something that, like, we literally had that conversation that she asked me one time, and it may have even been part of, like, some pre-marriage counseling. And I was like, oh, you would put the kids first. And she's like, no, like, you put your spouse, we put each other first, because if we not together as one, then like we can't have kids.
I like your wife, man. I like the way she thinks. No, but I think that's important because no lie, I had this conversation today, and it's gonna lead to a question. I had posted something on on Instagram, and this girl, we talked back in the day at Michigan, and she was like, I don't understand why you just won't marry me. It could all be so simple. and I responded with, you don't want to have any more kids, and we parent differently. And I'm sure there's something else you mentioned. And the reason why I bring it up is because, like, she has a child, and she has a very different philosophy in child rearing than I do. She's a person that, and maybe I need to come more to her side a little bit, but where she's at, I'm like, I don't understand that, because she's the type of person that will like want to like explain everything to her child, and I get empowering your kid, letting them make decisions, but she wants to have those conversations up front and then let the child like decide. And I'm like, no, I want my child, if I ask them to do something, to go do what I asked them to do. We can talk about it later, but I don't want to build a like habit of we're going to talk about it because there's an emergency. I can't have a conversation with you when I need you to run out the house because it's on fire. You're like, well, I feel fine. You know, I can't be doing that kind of stuff. And so it's a running joke because we both know that. Like, that's we both just don't see that the same way. That's why I bring it up. But it leads to the question of, did you feel like you guys were aligned? Not early on, but before you proposed, around how you envisioned how you would raise your children and how she was raising her child? And where were there some like inconsistencies where y'all had to like have those conversations?
So I think, we definitely talked about it. I think one thing that I will say in my entire experience with my wife is that it has forced me to, have the, responsible and important conversations versus, kicking the can down the road, right? Like, you can sort of do that when you're dating to a certain extent, but like when it's kids involved, then that impacts everything. Like, you just don't have that leeway, at least in my opinion. So I think for us, like, we had a lot of conversations about this type of stuff early on. And for me, the proof was in the pudding of seeing, how she was, parenting. So I was like, okay, I see how this could play out. I'm listening to you. I see how your family, which is for me a really big thing, like how they are with like my wife's like nieces and one nephew. So okay, I kind of get a feel for how how you were raised and how you think about things. The couple of things that I wouldn't say we disagreed on, but it was
different.
Me thinking about my experience as a kid and versus her experience as a parent. It was like, candidly, like whippings and stuff like that, right? Like, I mean, my parents are both social workers, but don't get it twisted. They'll get that belt, quickness,
Yeah.
My grandma, I done pulled some switches in my day, right?
Yeah.
So like, I come from that. I kind of,
same here.
So that's what I know, and that's what I knew. So it's like when I started having these conversations with her, and it's like, wait, you never whipped her or nothing? And it was like no, it was a couple of like pinches maybe like over life, and I'm like, wait, that's possible? Like, this is like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And so it was fairly eye opening to me, and not in a sense of like I'm so staunch in my opinion, but it was like, oh, I think one way from what I remember, but that doesn't mean it's got to be the same way. So we just talked about it.
Yeah.
Similar thing, I won't get into too much detail here, but we might not be the most active church going couple, right? But we also are on the same page on those things.
A mutual friend of ours told me, he was on the podcast, and he was like, it doesn't matter, Justin. We say his name. Justin was on the podcast, and Justin was like, one of the things that he said was like it's important to find out like where your big rocks are, like what they are, and those have to be aligned. And everybody's big rocks are different, and so you may have a big rock that might be a little rock for her. So like where you're like I can't move, and you're like, well, it don't really matter, right? But if you guys have the same type of big rock or big rocks in the same kind of area, it's important that you guys are aligned in those things because you have to fill it up, your cup up with the big rocks, and then the little, medium rocks where you may have some gray, and then little rocks where you just don't really care. And so it seemed like where some of y'all's rocks were very much aligned, in terms of like y'all either felt like these were medium to little rocks on, or if they were big rocks, you guys are on the same page in those respects.
No, I agree, man. I remember listening to Justice podcast, and I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that part specifically, but I'm like, yeah, that's some sound wisdom right there. I do agree with that part for sure. But I think you only get to identifying what those rocks are if you play that analogy out. You got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like it don't have to be in one conversation, or like it could just be over time. Right? We had those conversations about like income and salary early on when we were dating. Right? Because I'm like,
how quickly did y'all have that conversation?
Man, you know what? I think we had that conversation probably within our first 6 months.
Like, how did it come up?
So
was it organically, or you just like?
I think it was kind of organically, but I was trying to finesse the situation. Of like,
oh, so you wanted to know?
Yeah, I was trying to sense it out. I'm like, okay, she's a single mom. Like, I kind of know what she does. Kind of see how she lives and everything. I'm trying to get a feel for.
Couldn't find it out via Indeed, glass door.
and I can't remember the exact specific, but I think she would say that like I asked her something about, gosh, what was it? It may have been something about like how often she going to the grocery store, or blah blah blah, like something way off base to try to like connect. Yeah, something wild like. And then eventually, I think we just got around to it, and then like I told her how much I made, she told me how much she made, and I'm like, oh, okay, because in my mind, I'm starting to think now, okay, I view things from how do I support myself?
Yeah.
How do I potentially view things for supporting three?
Yeah.
Like, and that's a different dynamic. But then in the same token, going back to like the positive sides of everything, like, go to our house and she's making meals, she's making dinner. Like, I see how
she cooks.
And I'm like big picture. I get into the details. I'm like, oh, that's like $20. She's like, no, that's $19.76. Right. So like,
I'm gonna save 24 cents, bro.
So I'm like, oh, you start just thinking through like how this starts to play out. Like, okay, like she handles her. She's not looking for anything. Like,
yeah.
So I can focus on us.
I'm trying to think. You said something. Oh, if she would have. So y'all having this conversation about salary, right? Was there like a certain number that would have been like, have you thinking about things differently, or was it more of a function of if she like how she handled money? Were you trying to figure out?
I think I was trying to assess the first piece to figure out the second piece. Right, it's like, how much you making? And like, okay, let's see, how do I think this is like materializing here?
Yeah, how does this work? Given how much you make?
Yeah.
Listen, I see people on Instagram sometimes, and I'm like, I know what you do, but the life you live in, unless I can't manage my money well, I don't know. Something's not adding up in what's going on here.
and I think one time she told me, like back when early on in our dating journey, I had gone out or whatever, and I think I told her like I spent like a couple $100 that night. Not the norm. That was definitely not the norm.
Yeah.
But I think for her it was like, dude, what the hell are you doing?
You know how many dinners I could have made with that?
It's like, wait, this is the type of lifestyle that you're living right here? Like, hold on, I don't know if this is gonna work. But yeah, I think that's why we started to have a lot of those conversations early on. So it's like, okay, I see how you move, I see how you operate, and that, that comes full circle to like how we think about budgeting and stuff to this day.
I think I know your answer to it, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Instead of a binary question, I'll change it up. How soon do you think people should like be having these conversations? Because I know, like, especially in our community, money is always like a sensitive topic, right? And so I would imagine that you agree it's important to talk about sooner than later. But how soon would you think is too soon? Whether she's
Too
inquiring
soon?
about you, or let's say if someone's inquiring about you.
I mean, I think if you are, we ain't even been out on at least 3 dates. I'd say more than that, but I'm saying like bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
Like I think if I put a timing on it, probably a few months, because at that point in time, I would assume you have both mutually invested the effort and energy to say, okay, this is something could be here, right? Um, I think honestly, like within that 3 to 6 month window is where I would start to have more of these conversations
Yeah.
because then you just start needing to vet stuff out, right? Like, is this going to be worth both of our time? Because for some people, you know, might not be the case. Like, I might love you, but if you got, $600,000 student loan debt,
You miss out. You would miss
um,
out on love for that.
yeah. I mean, for some people, it might be.
I'm asking
I
about you.
mean, 600 racks. Yeah, I mean,
I mean, I don't know how you
yeah,
accumulate
nah,
that much, but
yeah,
is there a
nah.
number that like 100,000? That's reasonable. That's easily reasonable.
Oh, I mean, with even people that we know, I was like, yeah, I would expect that to a certain extent. I
So when
think
it's 300, like you're like, it's too much.
I probably would have said two.
Too.
I probably would have said two.
You at 201.
Yeah,
This ain't gonna work, baby.
this ain't popping
No,
unless
it's
unless you got some. But like, this is where it comes into play. Like, all right, what are you doing?
yeah, that's fair.
To Because when you get married, we talked about this a lot. It was like, oh, like that's our debt now.
Yep. Yep. And I want to make sure we hit that because I definitely have a certain perspective when it comes to that. But yeah, I remember I talked to this girl I knew. She was telling me something about how she wouldn't date a guy with bad credit. I don't have bad credit, but like I tend to like just like to speak for the underdogs. When I was young,
Yeah.
I advocated for like the older women dating young guys. Even I still do it now. Shorter guys, I advocate for us. And even though I don't got bad credit, I still advocate for them. And not to say like there's a yes and like to me it shouldn't be so binary, right? But she was very much like
100% agree.
matter of fact. Like if you have this number below bad credit, I won't even talk to you. And I was trying to broaden her perspective, and I was like, well, do you know why it's bad? Maybe his parents messed it up. Maybe he didn't know about money, and so he's building it. It might have been worse, and he's been building it up. There's so many reasons why someone's credit might be bad for you not to like, for you to cancel it, right? And it was funny that she was like so adamant about like a person with bad credit, and like she's a believer, and she's talking about we talked about God and all this, and like this could be your calling on his life to like help him figure out this. He might be great, but this is where he might need some support to figure that stuff out. So we was having this conversation, and it was like get on my nerves. Come to find out, this girl got like I can't even remember how much student loan debt she had, and I'm like, how you gonna be tripping about a guy with bad credit when you got like like I don't think she has a master's, but you have this crazy amount of student debt with a bachelor's degree. To me, it felt like a little hypocritical. I was just like, yo, like you just don't know what people's situations are. To like, if you saying like dating game is hard enough, like why cancel potential, options for stuff that could be fixed, right? Like it.
It's and I anyone that views these things in absolutes, like I'm like that's just not how people in the world work. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you need context, you need why. It's effectively like it's like part of the whole picture, part of an equation, right? So yeah, if somebody's got bad credit right now, I mean, hey, my credit wasn't terrible, but it wasn't what it was. Like once I graduated B school, now it's today, right?
Credit and forget it.
So
back
it's like
then.
if we were, yeah, right. So like if someone was talking to me in that sense, like, hey, well, yeah, this ain't gonna work.
Missing out on their
But
blessing.
for me, Yeah, but it's like, yeah, you might be missing out on your blessing, and it's like, what other thing in your life is so clear that that's the one determining factor, right?
That's
Especially with money.
that's the thing
Like,
that I don't understand. I think you said it like it's an equation. You have to have context, just because you just don't know where people have been and how those things have factored into their lives and the causes before you could. It would be one thing if you like gave the person a chance and they just like terrible with money. It's like, well, I don't need those practices in my life, and they're not trying to change. But to not know their situation and where they're at and just say, no, I can't do it. It was like, yo, like, is this how you see the world? It's a little bit mind blowing.
yeah, and that goes back to those signs of like, oh, okay, cool. Well, you know what? We could be in the we vibing category versus versus the okay. Let's get serious about this because yeah, nah.
No, I mean, it's as a person in the dating world, it's I tend to like try to reflect a lot on decisions I've made, people that I haven't worked out with, things that I was willing to let go of or lose, or I would say miss out on because I didn't want to do, being stubborn or didn't want to do the things that they might have wanted to, and like try to figure out like where could I have given more? I was just being a jerk, or where were these like real things versus I just was like, we all get in our heads and we have certain perspectives, and I try to be more accountable to myself around like, hey, in your past, like where have you been? Where's been the difference between things that you were like, this is indicators for what's not going to work for you, versus these are like preferences that like are not that important. And I think in my conversations with guys that are married, you start to realize there are a lot more things at the end of the day that are not that serious. That like I think prior to those guys being in their marriage, they probably were thinking along similar lines as me. Is like it's probably a little bit more critical than it actually is when they're in marriage.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you play that out, potentially even in my household, it was like, okay, well, how much income and potential debt are you bringing to the table versus where I'm at? But then it also was a conversation around, okay, like, what are your aspirations? What are your, like passions? What are you trying to do? Not just, from a dollar to cent standpoint, but like, what's keeping you going? Because, we can't be each other's headache every day.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
no, for sure. And I'm sure you. I mean, I know you well enough, but I feel like guys in our circles, like, there's like sometimes there's a stereotype or stigma around like guys don't want strong women, alpha women because like insecurities and yada yada yada. But when I think about like, the guys in our circle, I feel like most of them, if not all of them, actually find that very attractive. Women that can handle their own, are independent, don't necessarily need them, but want the guy in their life. And so I think we tend to like respond well to those personalities and characteristics when we see them in women.
Yeah, I'd say that's me and my wife to a T. It was like, oh, like she's good. She's not sweating this. She's confident enough in her own skin across the board where, it makes me want to check myself.
Yeah. Say more.
Well, I think so. I'll bring up a pseudo travel example, but it may have been that same trip that we was talking about earlier.
Yep.
Right? So, I mean, whenever folks are back in Ann Arbor, it's like quick, kind of like 48 hours. So like you're going nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
So I am someone who can get caught up in the swing of things, and I'm, just happy to see people. So I literally look up and it's been a full day and I'm only talking to folks, that's around.
Yeah.
On one of those trips, like I didn't really communicate with her like at all, like from the time I left to like the time I was driving back. And then, she was pretty catered, like, hey, like, I'm glad you're okay, but like, I don't like how, like you didn't even tell me that you were there and blah, blah, blah. And like, initially my reaction was like, oh, this is somebody who's trying to like, police me and, see where I'm at every, moment of the day. Where in reality, she just asked a couple of basic questions. Then she gave the context of like, well, her dad was in the military. So like, going away on some tours and stuff. So for her, it's like you just never know what could happen.
Yep.
And it was more like, hey, I don't need to know what I trust you because at the end of the day, you're gonna do what you're gonna do regardless.
Yep.
These are the days that she would say. But I just need to know, like, are you alive? Are you there? And when you coming back?
Simple as that.
And I was just like, okay, like I get it, right? Like she was secure enough in herself to not be like, oh, he's doing like 8, million different things, or who knows if he's around a whole lot of women. Because she's like, listen, like I'm not there. Like, so whatever you gonna be doing, you gonna be doing. Like, I'm just gonna have to, trust you and deal with that. But like, you gonna tell me when you got there, and when you come at home.
And how soon was that in the relationship when like those things were communicated?
That was like first 6 months, bro. This was like probably like 3-4 months in, and I think that has helped in a lot of ways. Where it's like, okay, she knows I'm gonna be my own person. She's like, all right, well, you going somewhere? Let me know when you get there. We coming back. Like,
no, I think that's real, and I think these conversations tend to primarily come from a woman's perspective, but I think it should happen on both ends of it. But I think it's important to communicate in a practical manner, like what you need and where your boundaries are. Because if you don't, one, the person doesn't know, and so there's always ignorance. You can't be mad at that. But two, because like sometimes that gets confused with like insecurity, right? Versus like, no, this is just a need I have. Like it's important for me to know these things, something that I want in my relationship. So this is a boundary I have for the people that I'm with. And to not like mix the two and understand like there's a difference between saying, hey, Courtney, it's important for me to know these things. Here's why. And then let it be on you to show her, well, are you going to acknowledge what's important to her and show up in that way or not? I think sometimes people, and I won't say women or men, but people get scared of like how that person is going to respond because they might show them something that will tell them like you shouldn't be with this person. So they don't want to put up that boundary because like this person might walk over it. This person might not respect it. Then I'm going to get obvious evidence that like I shouldn't be with this person that I really like. And then I'm going to be in this kind of dilemma. And so, how do you avoid that? Well, I'm not going to bring it up, and I hope they kind of figure out my mood's going to change a bit and all these other things versus being very clear and saying, what you want, what you need. One of my good friends, he was on the podcast, the first episode, his name is Brandon. He always tells me, you know what? If a woman likes you, it doesn't matter. And he says that in the context of like, sometimes you try to think of like what to do. Are you doing the right thing? And he's like, man, if a girl likes you, it don't really matter what you do because your joke might not be that funny. She's going to laugh. You might be doing something that's very corny. She's going to like it, if she likes you. And if she doesn't, and if she doesn't, she's like, oh, that was whack. Then like the girl, he was whack. No, you just didn't like him. It might not have been that his stuff was whack. You're just not interested in that guy. And so I say that to say, like, I think when people care for you and are vested, they're going to respect your boundaries and they're going to want to make sure that they're operating in a way that makes you feel comfortable and safe and to build trust. And so, I think it's important, and I'm glad that she was able to communicate those in a way and also say you responded to show like you can do it. It's okay. And when you're with someone that values you, they're not going to give you they're going to respond accordingly.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think well said. And it was an example like early on of just like, okay, she's effectively communicating to me, one of her boundaries, why, like, and I'm not expecting her to explain this all the time, but I can take that information and do one of two ways. I can combat that, which would have been pointless in my opinion, or I can accept it and say, oh, all right, well, if I'm invested in potentially making this work, like, I will respect that and take that and remember that for the next time this happens.
I'm going to leave it right there, and I hope people remember to follow on Instagram at ThinkLoveWife. I hope they remember to subscribe to the podcast. I hope they remember to share this podcast with a friend. Share the episode or your favorite one. Shoot me a DM, send me some feedback, review, and rate this podcast. Until next time, I'm going to bring Courtney back. We had a couple more things to talk about. We're going to hit a couple of serious, more emotionally driven topics, and you know, do what we do. So until next time, you know what it is. I hope the conversation keeps going.